From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Sherry. G'day, good evening, wherever you happen to be. Big breaking news night. Lots of Australian politics that will dominate the show this evening. But right now, it's 9 p.m. in Sydney and in Melbourne. In Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States, it has just broken 6 a.m. As you know, 4.5 hours ago, a cargo ship smashed into the city's major bridge and it collapsed. Local authorities claim that there may well be as many as 20 people in the water. There are some reports that there was also a roadworks crew, but nobody's confirming that at this moment in time. The bridge was built in the 1970s, but it was hit by a cargo ship that I believe was branded from Singapore. I'll double check that. It's either Singapore or the Philippines as the hour rolls on. There's also some breaking news which is taking place out of London, where it has just gone 10 a.m. and in 30 minutes' time, the High Court of London, or of the UK rather, is going to make the final decision on whether or not Julian Assange is going to be able to fight his extradition to the United States. Now, we don't know whether that judgment is going to be one where the decision will just be simply announced and then the details will follow, or whether the court will take its time to explain its reasons and then get to its reasons. So the plan for the hour is that the moment there are any developments in either of those stories, we will go live to both so you can hear the latest. As the sun starts to come up in Baltimore, obviously, and with people in the water for 4.5 hours, the suggestions from locals there is that it is a mass casualty event, as Sherry's been covering in the past hour for you, and also that situation from London. We get to all of that and we will do so a little bit later. But till then, I'm trying to jam in as much news as possible. We're also going to have Nigel Farage on the show and a great debate as always. So sit down, don't move. You've got an hour in front of you of pretty interesting stuff, including today. The headlines are not great for the Prime Minister. The headlines are not great for the Labor Party. The headlines read that the Prime Minister's personal ratings have fallen this week. Labor is heading towards minority government, according to Newspoll, and the Roy Morgan poll today came out and said 50-50. Add to that the Essential poll, which comes out in the Turnbull Times, otherwise known as The Guardian, and they've got a real problem. Because while the Coalition's vote is only ever so slightly up from the last election, according to this poll, now, after tax cuts, after everything else, the Labor Party's primary vote is down 3.6% from the election. Now, they were able to form a government off the lowest primary vote in the best part of a century. Even lower means Greens will take seats off them. Now, even though the Greens are slightly down, still, that more than compensates for the problem that is happening inside the Labor Party right now. Interestingly, 2 polls in a row show us that there has been a 2-point jump since the election for One Nation. Now, interestingly, in the Essential poll, they still keep counting the United Australia Party, who are down from the last election. But to see that there is the best part of 10% of the vote. Now, if 10% of the vote follows the preference discipline towards the LNP that it did in 2019, this thing's going to be close. If it goes 50-50 or it splurts around like it did in 2022, then yes, Albo gets re-elected. So your preferences matter. It's a message I'm going to start saying every day between now and whenever that election's going to be, because your preferences will determine whether Albanese gets a majority or a minority or one heck of a historical shock. But the numbers, well, what's behind them? Well, let's have a look at male voters. Male voters, well, the primary vote of the LNP is up to 40%. The Labor Party is down to 28%, so even worse than with overall. Now, of course, we keep being told that the Liberal Party has a problem with women. The only problem is somebody should tell the pollsters, because believe it or not, the Liberal Party is currently out-polling the Labor Party when it comes to women. Now, these are fractions of a sample size, and nobody's going to pretend that this is what an election is going to be. But that's why narrative is important. As long as I've been talking to you, I've tried to talk about the difference between news, what's going on, and narrative, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. And often politics is about covering the narrative. That's why they avoid the bad news and they only cover the certain narratives that they want. Now, this is why the Liberal Party has a problem with women, is something that is constantly drilled into people. Now, regardless of whether or not you think there are enough Liberal MPs that are females, enough candidates that are women. The very reason why the Labor Party and the media say things like this over and over again is because they need women to back Labor. Otherwise, the lead that the Libs have with men would result in an election victory.
Seem incapable of recognising that 50% of the population are female and that the Parliament should represent the people.
That the Liberal Party has the lowest number of Liberal women in their parliamentary ranks since 1993.
The Liberal Party is in the middle of a debate about how it recruits and treats women.
Well, the dramatic departure of Julia Bishop from Parliament is being seen this morning as yet another sign the Liberal Party has a problem with women.
The LNP will host its International Women's Day event at a men's-only club in Brisbane. As the Minister for Women, does the Prime Minister think this is right?
Over and over and over and over and over and over. Now, of course, it all crescendoed at the last election and resulted in the Teals being able to take seats in the Parliament. Now, whether people are voting on identity, policy or narrative is always the chief fight of those that are trying to move your vote in one direction or the other. But right now, based off the failures when it comes to cost of living, men are well and truly walking away from the Labor Party, and right now, statistically, women are too. Now, also, we know from these polls that for the 9th month in a row, Australians are telling us that we are heading in the wrong direction. It's the same with men, it's the same with women, it's the same with almost every demographic group. 49% of the country say we are headed in the wrong direction, hence why the Prime Minister's polls are where they are. Now, this is, as I said, is the 9th month. Now, the Prime Minister and his supporters, well, they may well end up clinging to the idea that he is the preferred Prime Minister. But again, the essential poll, the one in The Guardian, is telling us that 47% of people disapprove of his leadership right now. 47%. This is next to 49% in the Resolve poll. We know that he's underwater, with, again, more people disapproving than approving in News poll. So multiple polls, well, they start to prove a trend. Whether a trend builds to a narrative and the narrative informs the news, well, we all wait and watch together. But of course, one of the reasons why the government is in the problems that they are right now is because of the ridiculous ministers that he has put on the front line of changing the country, of trying to make the Twitter fantasies of a certain group come true. Now, of course, Chris Bowen was the one in the fire today, and I've got plenty to say about how the media fell for spin and rubbish today. No, back down, please. But we know this bloke, he wants to tell you what car you can drive. Of course, there's no one's forcing you to do it. They're just going to essentially put a tax on top of all the cars that aren't electric vehicles, not to mention the luxury car tax that they have put onto hybrid vehicles. Then there's the other ministers, like the Home Affairs Minister, the one who is, of course, in charge of our borders. She is more senior than the Immigration Minister, but it certainly matters because she's just been put at the front about population. We were told in December of last year that this government was going to be pulling back on what was a near record year of people coming into the country. That was the announcement in December. The only problem was 100 and something thousand people ended up coming through in January. I'll double check that number, but there was certainly the biggest number in 9 years, my apologies. Biggest number in 9 years came through in January of this year. Then we see today that based off that big January number and the expectations between now and the end of the financial year, that 375,000 people will come into the country by June. Now, if that's the case, we're going to end up with even more people in the country than last year's near record numbers. Last year it was 659,000. Well, we can all put 375 together with 375 and it ends up as more than 659,000 people. So they announced they're going to cut back, but every indication is that we are still being supercharged to too many people coming into the country. And that's not a statement about race. Yes, I noticed that little passive-aggressive whack on Q&A last night. It's about our capacity to deal with having more people. Literally, people die in the back of ambulances in Australia because there are not enough hospital beds. There aren't enough doctors. There aren't enough nurses. The hospitals aren't big enough. They're not new enough. Our population supercharges that now, in the state of Victoria, just before their last state election, 33 people died because the O system didn't work. Record ramping and, again, deaths in places like South Australia, and don't even get me started about the health system that the now Premier, Roger Cook, has driven into the ground in Western Australia. You add more people, you add more problems. You add more surge to it, let alone the problems of people being able to find rental accommodation or the competition that comes for those that are trying to buy their first, second or forever house. That's why immigration matters. So again, no surprise that this is a government that's in a world of pain. Of course, Andrew Giles, another one of the ministers who is doing the government no favours, following the Prime Minister down the rabbit hole to nowhere. Now, as we know, they decided to present at 7:30 this morning legislation that apparently had been printed and sitting on their desks since Friday in an attempt to say, we've got a solution to the immigration situation. Well, you know what their solution is? The solution is that if you refuse to be deported, you'll go to jail for a year. But guess what happens after you've been in jail for a year? You can walk out free around the country. Here in part is what his opposition number, Dan Tehan, had to say about it today.
Did the minister come to us and say, OK, we want to give you this legislation so that you can look at it over the weekend, so that you can make sure there's no unintended consequences? No, he did not. He sat on it over the weekend. He sat on it yesterday and then presented it to us today.
Now, this rush legislation is, in part, because Parliament's not sitting on Thursday. Why? Because it's a public holiday on Friday, and everyone needs a day to travel. Like everyone else has to work right up until Thursday night. I'll be here on Thursday night. All right, plenty of people are going to work across the time, but no, these precious pollies, they've got to be on the plane and they've got to have all Thursday to get back to whatever they're planning to do over the Easter long weekend. So with that being the case, the expectation is we've announced our solution, back it or not. So then we can spend the next 6 weeks when Parliament isn't in existence pretending that any problems when it comes to the immigration system is Peter Dutton's fault. But there was a humorous moment today, and forgive me, but it comes down to parliamentary procedure. Now, who knew that there's a difference between speaking like this and speaking with a piece of paper magically over your head? You see, if you are a politician who's speaking in the middle of a normal debate, you don't need the piece of paper over your head. But apparently you do need a piece of paper over your head if you want to have a debate while the doors are locked and no further MPs can come in before a vote is taken. I don't know why. I'm sure somebody who loves the Parliament will tell me why this is a very important tradition, but it looks really stupid. I don't know why we can't get rid of this. You know, all the conversations about do we or don't we keep the Lord's Prayer. Before we have that chat, can we just say we don't need the paper on the head thing? That was weird. Another underperforming minister, another reason why this government is in a world of trouble, despite the fact that most of the media won't tell you, they're all out there barracking because they like the relationships that they have, is this useless minister, Annika Wells, of course the Minister for Sport, who fitted up a whole travel scenario to be able to go down to Melbourne, to deliver a speech. But, she just happened to be able to go to the Melbourne Cup as well. But as the Minister for Sport, she didn't go to the Melbourne Cup. As the Minister for Sport, she, of course, ended up in the birdcage at the Furphy tent. She's one of the ones who's had the biggest pay rise in 10 years, yet she's the one telling you that you have to pay more for aged care. She's the one telling you that if you're rich because your house has gone up in value in the 20 years since you've owned it, let alone the 30 years you've taken care of the garden, that somehow you should definitely have to pay more if you would like to stay in your home for as long as possible and not clog up the aged care system. I mean, again and again and again, the government is in a world of pain because of the people they have put in charge and the decisions they make. And it's also the decisions they don't make. Of course, Grim Jim, the greatest treasurer of all time. Sure, families are in a recession right now. We have a per capita recession that even the ABC notices. But the federal government's okay because we're going to have a couple of budget surpluses because of iron ore prices, which of course doesn't affect anyone outside of those that take the tax. Now, he's in a position to make your life easier tomorrow. He could cut petrol taxes, but are they planning to do that anytime soon? Of course not.
No.
There's no way.
No way.
No.
No. No. No. No. No.
No.
No.
No.
Now, let's talk about Chris Bowen in greater detail. Let me take my time here. Now, as you know, Chris Bowen is obsessed with Australia and its 1% of global emissions. China is, of course, 30% under the Paris Agreement because they're a developing country. They don't have to do what we have to do by 2030. Instead, they can continue to pollute and double their pollution literally every single day between now and 2030. And their 30% of climate emissions becomes 35, 40% of climate emissions, but we have to tie one hand behind our back because we're 1% of global emissions. We all know that he thinks everyone should drive an electric car because that's the way to bring down emissions, and if we do our bit, we can stop bushfires forever. Despite the fact that the atmosphere is also affected by what the heck China, the third world, is also doing. But shh, don't tell anyone. China's a developing country. It has a space station. They've also had 2 Olympics this century. Well, as you know, he's come right up against it because his plan to introduce a price disincentive, put simply, a tax put on higher emitting vehicles. Frankly, it's a car carbon tax. That's the easiest way to explain it to you. Well, all of that, of course, affects the cars that Australians actually buy. And while more people buy electric vehicles each and every year, it's still a nothingness compared to the overall vehicles we buy. Have a look. I've shown you this before. These were the car sales from Australia last year. Electric vehicles, well, very small number of that. Instead, of course, it is SUVs, which is the green, and the orange, which is light commercial. The big cars you like to buy. But because they're not electric, we have to put a price disincentive, meaning that certain cars end up costing $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 more than they otherwise would because they basically have to pay the car carbon tax. Now, as you know, this was announced a few months ago, and the lie that was explained to you was that if you buy the right car and everything goes the right way and the wind's blowing in the right direction, you might save $1,000 by 2030.
We know that by 2028 this will save average consumers on each vehicle each year over $1,000.
By 2028, $1,000. And then you know they fitted up that it was $1,800 and yesterday it was apparently going to be $5,000.
And we want to introduce some fuel efficiency standards that improve choice for Australian motorists and ultimately mean that they lower the cost of running their cars. It means that you won't have to put as much petrol in your car to run it every year. So on average, Australians will save about $5,000 a year by 2028.
And because this is all about making sure there's no bushfires anymore in Australia, because apparently fixing 1% of the world's problems will do it. Repeat, China, India, the rest of the third world, or as they call it now, the global south. Now, again, if you want to buy an EV, good luck to you. At some point in time, I'll probably buy one. I get how cool it is, the acceleration. I get how fancy some of them look. Fine, right? But until they can get it charging faster than it currently does and it can be easier to do, then a lot of people aren't going to go and make the change. At some point they may, but right now they don't want to. And certainly people who buy things like utes and SUVs, they want to be able to buy whatever car they want because it's the right one for their family or for their work, or God forbid, the people who use their work car to drive around their family. I know this is bizarre thing to say to politicians who, of course, get a free car. And in the case of people like Chris Bowen, he's had one for the whole time he's been in Parliament, which has been forever. So these people just forget. They don't have to care. They don't care about petrol taxes. They care about it when they're in opposition and they want to make a point. But when they're in a position to make a decision, no, nothing there whatsoever. So Chris Bowen says, no, this is the right decision, no change whatsoever.
Americans like big cars. The pickup truck is very popular in the United States. They've had fuel efficiency standards since the 1970s. Australia and Russia are the only 2 developed countries without fuel efficiency standards. We've agreed that we're going to continue to work on it. As I said, good progress has been made.
Well, this little thing called the public get involved. We've spoken about it relentlessly, so many other shows have here. You've read about it in the newspapers, but common sense suggests that putting a tax on top of the cars people already want to buy is probably going to annoy a few people. And that got confirmed. Again, you didn't hear much about this today because we only report about bad polling about the Liberal Party, of course, in the general political media. But have a look at this. This came from the Channel 9 newspapers, far right-wing, Resolve Political Monitor. And it shows 64% of coalition voters don't want this to happen. 28% of Labor voters don't want it to happen. 43% of all voters don't want it to happen. Big number of people remain unsure. But basically, you put the politics together here, it's almost half already at 43% that were against it. So what happened today? Apparently a major backflip. And didn't the media just eat this one up? Oh, a backflip, a major change. Chris Bowen, Catherine King, all the CEOs of the car companies. Oh, peace in our time.
This legislation will mean Australian motorists are no longer at the back of the queue, no longer treated as second-class citizens, but are given the same rights as those motorists and consumers in 85% of the world's car markets.
But here's what actually happened today. What actually happened today was that, yes, a couple of vehicles are going to have the categorisation changed. But what it means is, as opposed to paying $12,000 worth of car carbon tax, they will only now have to pay $9,000. There is a little bit of a delay as to when the fines are going to start kicking in, but the destination is exactly the same destination. The exact focus is still getting a major change in the cars Australians buy by 2028. So could somebody please explain to me why all of the car CEOs decided to actually turn up and pretend that they endorse this rubbish? Now, this is a little trick, and there's a bit of detail about how these tricks are achieved that Dennis Shanahan wrote beautifully about in The Australian today that I'm going to explain. But what this is about is making it look like everyone's on board, everyone agrees. Now, of course, as Andrew Bolt told you a bit earlier tonight, the Toyota boss came out and said, oh, yeah, the technology doesn't really exist, it's pretty expensive, so, okay. The reason they were all there is because, of course, the government is in a take-it-or-leave-it mode, which means just as they did when they just decided to put a luxury car tax onto hybrids, they could do anything with the importation of cars because, of course, we don't make them here anymore. They could change any rule at any time. And also, don't forget what is also happening here, which is that in places like the ACT, you are not allowed to sell a combustion engine car from the 2030s. So they're pretending that we've made this giant compromise where we're just going to still have a tax, but it'll be a slightly lower tax on maybe a couple of different vehicles, but basically the same system, with the same end point, which is to try to create a price disincentive about buying these cars while the states slowly but surely move to a scenario where, in the ACT, you can't sell combustion engines, and mark my words, in the progressive states, slowly but surely you will not be able to register older vehicles, and then eventually it will end up as a scenario where you won't be able to register a combustion engine. Watch this space. Now, I get it, it is a change from where they were, but it's not a backflip. A backflip is we're not doing it. A backflip is we're not doing it. A little bit of a change is a little bit of a change. But if there's still a tax and it's still going to make the cars you want to buy more expensive, nothing happened today. That's what the Nats are noticing.
So once again, this government, they've done everything in secret. They haven't taken you, the taxpayer, into their confidence. They've tried to negotiate these backroom deals here with the motoring companies. They've obviously been forced out like hostages to the press today to try and announce this deal. But we still don't have all the details on this. And it's completely, the government is treating the people with contempt. And we deserve to know what is in this deal, what are the details, release them ASAP.
Now, I didn't realise the conversation with Nicholas Rees was that violent last night, but all the best, Matt. I hope you're feeling okay. Now, as you can see, cameras are starting to move around in Baltimore. That is because we are expecting in the next couple of moments to have a press conference at those microphones. As we say, it's 23 minutes past 6 in the morning. Now, to tell you where Baltimore is, if you don't know the United States particularly well, it's New York, then down to New Jersey, then a little bit into Baltimore and just a little bit above Washington, D.C. So in that sort of if you're looking at the map, the sort of top right-hand quadrant of the map is where we're talking here. As you can see, they are testing the microphones. I understand we are close to a 2-minute warning, which in media terms means we are about to hear from local emergency officials. Now, the fire and rescue are the people who are the lead people that are trying to deal with those that have been trapped or potentially lost as a result of that bridge collapse, which took place the best part now of about 5 hours ago, give or take about 5 minutes. Now, the suggestions we've been working with was that the best part of 20 people were apparently in the cars driving across the bridge when this ship slammed into one of the support pylons, and as anyone who knows basic engineering, obviously the bridge works to keep itself safe and strong, and as soon as that becomes compromised in one part, well, you end up seeing what has just taken place here. Now, we haven't heard anything from the shipping company that is responsible clearly here. Now, there have been other bridge constructions over the years where they end up putting sort of protections in the water around the pylons. So if you hit that, you hit the protection barrier before you actually end up hitting the bridge. But as I say, 20 people were apparently in the cars because it happened at about 1:30 in the morning, so thankfully not in the middle of peak hour. But obviously this bridge, which is a multi-lane bridge, is the main way of people getting around in parts of Baltimore and potentially travelling to other parts of the United States. It's also a major shipping lane, so the disruption to normal life is obvious, but the loss of life is the particular focus right now. Now, again, we hope the number is much lower than that earlier number of 20, but as you can see, at about the middle of the bridge, you can start to see some of the cars and the headlights that are making their way into the water. As you can see, the officials making their way towards the microphone. 5 minutes from now as well in London, we're standing by to find out what's going to happen with Julian Assange. We'll get reaction from, among others, Nigel Farage, but we stand by to take you to the United States here with live comments from the officials investigating what's been happening in Baltimore. These pictures live at about 6:30 in the morning local time, about 9:30 in Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra.
My name is Chief James Wallace. I'm the Chief of the Baltimore City Fire Department. I'm joined this morning by our Mayor Brandon Scott, Council President Mosby, Councilwoman Porter, County Executive Johnny Olszewski, and Baltimore County Fire Chief Joanne Rund. Our brief this morning will be an update on the search order. County Executive Johnny Olszewski and Baltimore County Fire Chief Joanne Rund. Our brief this morning will be an update on the search and rescue operation that's ongoing at this point. So at approximately 01:40 hours this morning, our 911 center dispatched a call to the Baltimore City Fire Department for report of a water rescue in the Patapsco River in the area of the Key Bridge. As units were responding, they began to receive numerous calls indicating multiple people in the water. At some point during that chain of events of calls, we began to receive indications that a ship may have struck the Key Bridge. We got further information through multiple calls that the Key Bridge, portions of the Key Bridge had actually collapsed. At about 01:50 hours, our first unit arrived on scene and reported a complete collapse of the Key Bridge. We were also given information at that time that there were likely multiple people on the bridge at the time of the collapse, and that as a result, multiple people were in the water. We were able to remove 2 people from the water. One individual refused service and refused transport. Essentially, that person was not injured. However, there was another individual that's been transported to a local trauma center that is in very serious condition. At this time, we have multiple air assets from the Maryland State Police, as well as the Baltimore Police Department, as well as multiple marine assets from around the region, including Baltimore City, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, as well as multiple local and state police agencies, National Resources Police, BPD Special Ops Unit is in here, Maryland State Police is here. We have multiple resources. We are still very much in an active search and rescue posture at this point, and we will continue to be for some time. We have a large area that we have to search. This includes on the surface of the water, subsurface, as well as on the deck of the ship itself. We believe at this point we may be looking for upwards of 7 individuals. That's the latest information we have. However, what I will say is the information that I'm giving you right now is as of right now. That's what we know right now. This is a very large incident. It involves a very large footprint. Multiple agencies are operating, therefore information is subject to change as we get more intel and as our crews work through the morning. Over the next 8 to 12 hours, you can expect to continue to see our air and maritime assets functioning out on the water and in the air above. We need to do damage assessment of the ship itself before we can board that ship. And we need to continue our subsurface search, which is including different types of sonar. We have side scan sonar. We have other sonar capabilities here. We have underwater UAVs that we're working with. And throughout the night, we've also been working with infrared technology, both from the air and on the water surface. So I'm going to wrap up here with just saying this continues to be a search and rescue operation. It continues to be a very dynamic operation with multiple local, state, and federal resources involved. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Mayor, Mayor Brandon Scott.
Thank you, Chief. Everyone, this is a unthinkable tragedy. We have to first and foremost pray for all of those who are impacted, those families. Pray for our first responders and thank them, all of them working together, city, state, local, to make sure that we are working through this tragedy. This is an ongoing active research that we're having right now. We're going to continue, as you heard from Chief Wallace, throughout. As long as we have to be doing that, we will do it. But we have to be thinking about the families and people impacted, folks who we have to try to find and save. This is what our focus should be on right now. And we're going to continue to work in partnership with every part of government to do everything that we can to get us through the other side of this tragedy. And with that, I'll turn it over to County Executive Olszewski.
All right, obviously Sky News Extra is where you can watch the remainder of the detail, but the key details that has been provided by the Mayor of the City of Baltimore and their Fire and Rescue Chief is that they are now looking for 7 people as a result of this bridge collapse, which has taken place after a Singaporese cargo ship smashed into one of its pillars. It completely collapsed. That was at about 1:30 in the morning local time, about 5 hours ago to this exact minute. At about 10 to 2 o'clock in the morning, so about 20 minutes later, which is when the first emergency crews arrived. They were able to save 2 people. One was not injured and did not have to go to hospital. One has been injured and is in a very serious condition. They are searching both on the air, on the surface and under the water for what they believe is 7 people. As soon as we know more, you will know more. We're also standing by for breaking news about whether Julian Assange will have to be extradited from the United Kingdom to the United States, plus Australian political debate, Nigel Farage. A lot happening tonight. And if you would like to continue to watch that press conference, it's over on Sky News Extra. In the meantime, we will continue with the show as planned, on top of all of that breaking news, right now on Sky News. What a night, what an hour. We get to our normal debate in a moment or two's time. Here's a live shot from the United Kingdom, though, because the High Court will make its decision in the coming minutes as to whether or not Julian Assange will be able to remain in the UK or he will be extradited to the United States. As you can see, reaction will be swift. We will have it for you the moment it happens. The control room knows. Crash over anything we're talking about and get straight to it the second that we know something. I'm trying to spin as many plates as I can to both be in the middle of the conversation right now with the wonderful Linda Scott, James Morrow, and keep an eye on what's going on. So you won't miss anything, I promise you. Let's talk about this cast thing that took place today, right? I don't think anything happened today. I think like a little bit of a haircut, but the destination remains the same, and $12,000 taxes became $9,000 taxes. Yet, how many times did I read the word backflip or back down or major change? Or there was, at best, a slightly tighter haircut.
Yeah, and Paul, you could tell that it really was a bit of a big deal about nothing here when you look at how people like the Electric Vehicles Council, they were like, this is so wonderful, we got there in the end. Because all this is about, there are some fiddles, fine, some of them are good, but, the bigger point here, Paul, is why do we even need to have, if the entire world is moving in the direction of electric vehicles, if automakers are moving in this direction anyway, why do we need to interfere with the market here to provide choices? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm seeing BYD cars show up all over the streets in my neighborhood. Nobody needs an extra incentive
100%.
To do this. So, let the market decide.
Now, again, one of the things that made it seemed to me like we were all being sold a bit of a con today was that you didn't have the environmental groups blowing up. If this was some major concession, major back down, they would have blown up today. Instead, they did nothing, which means basically they played the politics, but not much is changing here.
Look, I think it's really good what the government is trying to do. They're trying to get through emissions standards to help Australians. They're in the national interest for several reasons. One, we're the only nation in the world without Russia that doesn't have them. Two, these standards bring in vehicle emission standards to uplift the vehicles that we get here in Australia. We don't want to become the dumping ground for vehicles that don't have good emission standards. And why is that good, James? Because it means we get cars that are cheaper to run for Australians. I mean,
you want to get cars that are cheaper to run. You want to get cars that are cheaper to run.
Are incredibly expensive to run.
Get rid of the luxury car tax. How about that? And how about, like this idea that Australia is this dumping ground, this tiny little country where we drive on the wrong side of the road. These automakers are making these really big polluting vehicles just for us to say, let's see it dump all these in Australia. I just don't get that logic.
There's this whole second-hand car market. Of course that is the case.
Yeah,
that
but also,
we will become a dumping ground without these standards.
But this only applies to new cars.
But let's bounce to the other side of things, right? Which we've seen some local councils turn around and say, we're going to increase the parking rates if the cars are particularly big, right? We also know that in the ACT, they're turning around and saying you can't sell a combustion engine into the 2030s. And I think the more progressive state governments are going to turn around and start to say, well, if it's 10 years or older, you can't register it unless you want to do a classic car and therefore you can take it to a motor show. But there is a lot of other things that are going to come into this policy and a lot of other things that are going to come into the overall goal. And that's my issue here, James, which is that once you turn around and say what the ultimate goal is, then those that are willing to do any and everything to achieve it will do exactly what the ACT did. And you notice, no one's asking the Labor government whether they'll overturn the decision about whether the combustion engine can be sold in the ACT. It might just start at the ACT, but you don't think the Greens, with the balance of power in Victoria, mightn't try to do it? Who knows what's going to happen in Tasmania in the next 2 years?
Well, because, Paul, there is a big overlap between the pro-EV side and also the people who just simply hate cars per se, and they want people on public transport, and they just think that everybody should live the way that they live, and forget if you've got families or tools to drag around or whatever. For them, it's all, we all just live in our apartments with our Pomeranians and, that's our life and we take the train to work, and that's fine. But,
people with Pomeranians in apartments are still good people, James.
I know people in apartments with Pomeranians. They're some of the finest people I've ever met. But that said, there's a whole sort of gamut of experience here, and but so much of the politics rather seem to be about the politics of aesthetics. There are people who just think, we don't like these utes because they're big, and we don't like the people who drive them because they don't read Proust or whatever, and so therefore we need to screw them out of their trucks.
Right. This is just old school class warfare.
You're the one doing the class warfare.
It's not good public policy, right? What we're trying to do is have some standards that match the rest of the world to reduce emissions and, most importantly, to allow Australians to have a stronger, more choice market to buy vehicles that have lower emissions and are cheaper to run.
But there's nothing stopping
positive things for Australians.
There's nothing stopping these low EV.
My family has transitioned from a petrol car to an electric vehicle, and it is saving us thousands of dollars a year to run.
All right.
These are the opportunities that Australians
Can we also talk about?
You didn't need the standards to do that, though.
Can we also talk about the way that this government, in particular, I get the last word. Thank you.
Fine, sorry, Paul.
Is that those people and the way that this government's coming up with its decisions is that they're pretending that everyone backs in their decision because they all came to Canberra and they all heard what the decision would be. Dennis Shanahan wrote an excellent column in today's Australian newspaper. Now, if all governments have done this, all governments were wrong when they were doing it. But this government promised to be more transparent, all the rest of it. They make the people who they are negotiating the policies with essentially sign non-disclosure agreements to not talk about the negotiation process. Now, this is outrageous. This is supposedly the great transparency, the new politics. But the reality is that nobody's allowed to disagree with the government, or you don't get invited into the meeting, and the only way to stay in the meeting is to sign the piece of paper saying you won't talk about the meeting.
Well, look, I have to be honest with you. I haven't read Dennis Shanahan's
I will read it
article
to
in the
you.
Australian today.
As you fall asleep tonight, put me on speakerphone and I will read it to you.
But, like, can I just give you a local government example of
Sure.
why confidentiality around policy is really important? So, again, I haven't read the article. I don't know what it's claiming. But we have a whole series of requirements for confidentiality because, for example, if we allow people to understand that the council might be making a zoning decision, for example, that is going to have a material impact on that piece of land. And so public access to that information shifts value, and it is really important that confidentiality be upheld about that.
And I support that in terms of
risks with federal government laws that have material
It's about guaranteeing that nobody knows the sausage is being made. It's a way of stopping information.
This happened with, and I spoke to a number of people, a number of companies during the IR legislation, and they said, we can't talk about what the government is proposing to put in its legislation because we have been forced to sign an NDA. And this government goes even further than that. You know, during the whole voice process, I know that many lobby groups were told and companies were told, if you want access to your minister,
100%.
you have to come out in support of the voice.
100%. Now let's talk about Giles and this quick fix, which is going to result in, if you don't want to be deported back to the country after you have been ruled to be a refugee, then you'll go to jail for a year. But I want to know what's going to happen at the end of the 1 year in jail. Bronwyn Bishop was talking that her belief of the legislation was, well, basically, that's the end of it. You can now come into the community. Are you seeing anything beyond what happens at the end of the 1 year?
Yeah, look, I'm just seeing a panicked government here on this. This just looks like pure panic. You know, it looks like panic and it looks like politics because with the NZYQ decision, of course, you know, they were off campaigning for The Voice when they should have been listening to the Australian government solicitor on this. That's documented. And they were caught flat-footed. And now they say, oh, well, let's get on the front foot, but let's try and wedge the coalition here by calling them up at 7:30 in the morning on Tuesday when you've got 3 more days of Parliament before a 6-week break. And then you've got this other decision that's going to come down. It's panicked and it's political. And, you know, this is a huge problem for Labor because immigration hits at that crossroads of national identity, social cohesion, and cost of living. And people don't trust them on this.
Well, and also, I mean, certainly the concerns from the left is that they believe that it's criminalising being a refugee. The problem is that we have a pretty robust system that means you turn around and you either qualify to be a refugee, if so, welcome to the greatest country in the world, right? There's tens of thousands of people we take through the front door, so it's not like Australia's anti-refugee. But if you fail the process, at some point, you have to have the disincentive to fighting against the process, which means see you later at some point in time. But again, it's this game where I think the timing about this was drawn up on Friday. It was printed up on Friday. They could have spoken to anyone quietly behind the scenes. Instead, drop it on today. We all go home tomorrow afternoon. And if there's no resolution, if anything happens with the borders or anything happens with immigration detention between now and the budget, it's all Peter Dutton's fault. You know the game.
Well, look, I don't know that a whole lot of that is factual or true, and I say that respectfully, right? I am an incredibly strong supporter, as you know, of having a compassionate, decent, humane approach to the way that we handle refugees in this nation. The political debate around that has been absolutely toxic, and that is just awful and unnecessary. Of course, what we need to take refugees in a humane way is a system that upholds protections for people who are genuinely refugees and people who are not. And that is a very small number of people, but we need a proper system. The High Court cases recently have overturned long-standing legal provisions in this nation about how our immigration system works. And so it's reasonable that a government faced with a series of High Court decisions and perhaps pending ones is going to have a look at the system and see what's needed. But what I hope we don't see is Peter Dutton and the Liberal Party inflame this debate in an awful political way. Australia doesn't need to this time.
Just be super fast here because I'm going to have to jump here because I believe that the decision Has been. Okay, here we go. According to WikiLeaks now, the breaking news is, and I'm reading from WikiLeaks' account of the High Court decision in the United Kingdom, Julian Assange has been granted leave to an extension of his appeal when it comes to what is happening in the United States. Having spent almost 5 years detained, the most secure prisoner, the publisher will continue his long detention separated from his young family for revealing war crimes. Now, this was posted just within the past 5 minutes. So their spin here is that Julian Assange has been granted leave to appeal his extradition to the United States. So the process continues for him to remain in the United Kingdom. Julian Assange, his supporters, you will hear from in a moment or two's time. And after that, we will, of course, be joined by Nigel Farage in London. Linda, James, thank you. We'll talk to you all very soon. Told you everything's happening tonight, and it's all happening before your very own eyes. Julian Assange will be staying in the UK for a little longer. In a big night of breaking news, Julian Assange has been able to stay in the United Kingdom until at least May. That is when the High Court will further consider his latest bid to try not to be extradited to the United States. Nigel Farage joins us now. Of course, our colleague from GB News. Yet again, a delay. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I've met Julian Assange. I went to see him in the embassy a few years ago. I don't support everything that he did, but I do not want to see him extradited to the USA. I'm afraid my confidence in their judicial system right now is at an all-time low. So the fact that he's been given leave to appeal is, I think, a very good thing.
It does seem, again, that there's these constant, what we think is the last moment, and then something happens and something happens and something happens. What do you think the mood is amongst the general populace here? Because he's a figure who has changed and over the years about whether he was an anarchist or a journalist or a politician or all of these things. And understandably, when you're faced with going off to the United States after dumping their military secrets, you'll do anything to keep yourself out of jail. But do normal people think, OK, time served, that's it?
I think normal people are confused by the whole thing. They're not sure what to believe or what to think. But I do think in this country there is still very much a sense of fair play, you know, and the idea that if he goes off to America, gets a trial that is frankly completely one-sided and then some ridiculous sentence like 200 years in prison. No, I think most fair-minded people would say whatever he's done right, whatever he's done wrong, we should be able to deal with it here in this country. And you know what? He's been stuck in Belmarsh. He's been stuck now for years in that high-security prison. I mean, how much more punishment does he deserve?
Let's talk about Donald Trump, of course, going from having to pay $500 million today for it now being dropped down, and he gets another 10 days, I think, before it's $155 million. All of the circumstances around what this situation is, to me, seems utterly disproportionate, especially when you have to pay the fine despite the fact that you're appealing the case.
That, again, is truly astonishing, you know, and I repeat the point about Julian Assange. Just look at the way Letitia James has behaved. Elected, saying, I'm going to go after Donald Trump. A victimless crime, money borrowed from banks, paid back with interest. And the whole basis of this case is that places like Mar-a-Lago are valued at $18 million. Garbage. I mean, crikey, you couldn't buy the Century Hut at the front for $18 million. I mean, the whole thing is a nonsense. Good that the fine's been reduced. It's gone from being insane to obscene. It still is absolutely dreadful that he has to pay over this money. And as you say, you know, what is the point of an appeals process if you have to be punished first, even before you can appeal?
Well, I mean, literally, we're talking about that on both sides of the pond right now. And then there's, of course, the lefty freak out. No surprise that they all decided to go nuts because, look, basically, you know, they'd love to see, a public flogging of the bloke. Here's what they said today.
I don't even know if I care what the process is that these judges are arriving at. Whatever it is, it's flawed. I can tell you that much. I mean, David put it well. This is a different process for this person. We have decided that he gets his own private court of justice. He has a private plane. He has private clubs that he lives in. You know, apparently, you know, he basically fashioned himself his own private militia to try to take over the Capitol. You know, now he's getting his own private system of justice. This is an absolute travesty. It would not happen for anybody else. Anybody else, it would be like, sorry, buddy, you lost, pay up. For him, he gets his own set of rules.
Yeah, because the New York justice system is so pro-Trump.
I mean, look, it's absolutely farcical and comical, but, you know, we've talked before about Trump derangement syndrome. You know, he just drives some people so nuts that they lose any sense of logic whatsoever. My answer to that really would be that nobody else would be in court in New York for, I repeat, a victimless so-called crime.
Good man. Thank you, Nigel. I know there's a lot on, and I do appreciate fast reactions to things. That's why you're one of the best in the business. We love you, mate. All right, Nigel Farage there from the United Kingdom. Quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live, and then the late debate just a couple of minutes away. Big hour, big day. We'll see you tomorrow night for a special edition of Paul Murray Live. Why special? Because Megyn Kelly's back.